Today is January 5th, 1981, and my name is Judson McClory. I'm interviewing Dr. Eula Bingham, who is the head of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, Assistant Secretary of Labor for OSHA, and first woman to head the agency, and the person who has had the longest tenure by far of anyone to head that agency in its history. To start at the beginning, I'd like to ask you how you first became interested in occupational safety and health. What was it that got you started on this road that led to the OSHA hot seat?
Mm-hmm. Well, I at the point of graduation, I should say, really I was in the process of finishing up my thesis for the Ph.D. and needed a job, and after looking around quite a bit, decided to take a job with a group at the College of Medicine in the Department of Environmental Health. And
this is University of Cincinnati.
University of Cincinnati, and decided to go with them. Would provide me really an opportunity to be close to my major advisor while I finished writing my thesis, and just the final finishing touches. But it also provided an interesting group in which to work. It was a chemical carcinogenesis group, and they needed a biologist, and I fit the bill. I had a degree in zoology, had done my work in physiology. One of my minors was in ecology, and had done my thesis on skin, and so I was suited for that group because they were chemists. They needed a biologist, and the target organ in those experiments was the skin of mice, so just worked out that way. And once I went there, I stayed on, auditing, actually almost being a postdoc in that department, taking all the courses in industrial hygiene, toxicology, occupational medicine. Bob Kehoe, who was a pioneer in this field, was head of the department then. And we used to have seminars every Saturday morning where he used to charge us up about our responsibility for the health of workers in this country. And once you become involved in it, it's very hard to let go.
Mm-hmm.
So it's become my career.
How did it come about that you were selected finally to head OSHA under the Carter and Marshall administration?
Well, I think it. Well, I'm really not sure how it all happened. Certainly, my name was submitted as by women's organizations as being an individual who was a professional and trained in the area of environmental health, occupational health. So I was on a list that the women's group put together. I was also...
What women's group was that?
I believe it was now. I'm not certain. I would have to check with someone on that. I had not really been very active in women's affairs, but some women called me who had known me and said, we'd like to put your name on our list of qualified women. I also was, my name was submitted as a one of their choices, I think probably the first choice of the UAW for this spot. In addition, I know
had you had contact with the UAW?
Well, a very limited contact, as it turns out. My contact with UAW had been on I had known Frank Wallach very well.
Right.
He and I were in an organization together, still are, the Society for Occupational and Environmental Health.
Mm-hmm.
I was got to know two vice presidents at the UAW, Mark Stepp and Ray Majerus. Ray Majerus is actually he's now a vice president. At that time he was a district director.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very powerful spot in a very large part of the actually it was in Wisconsin. And they went on a trip that I took the year before the election. It was in April before the election.
Mm-hmm. Of
to Sweden.
1976.
No, 1970. Yes, 1976. That's right. And it was a trip to Sweden that they went on, and we looked at occupational safety and health conditions. It just so happened that they were on the same trip.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, I got to know them on that trip. Led many of the discussions, and I think they were interested in my scientific points of view. And it coincided with what they thought occupational safety and health ought to be. So my name appeared on their list. I don't know who else was on their list.
That's very powerful
right.
backing to have.
Well, actually, I can remember the discussions about the election at that point in time in Sweden. I can remember Mark Stepp and I talking about the support of Jimmy Carter by that union.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was also on the list of the AFL-CIO. I was one of at least two or three. I know Jack Sheehan was on their list also, and of course comes out of the union.
Jack Sheehan of the United
Steelworkers, that's correct. So I was on their list, and I think very high. I don't know how other things take place. Certainly.
How were you first notified that you were being
there was talk.
nominated?
There was talk with, let's say, some of the people in the union. Frank Wallach said, "Well, we're going to put your name on our list," and I laughed. And Shelley Samuels talked to me about it from the IUD, and I laughed and I said, "Oh, who are you kidding?" The next thing I knew, and I'd have to look in my diary, it was sometime in last week in, probably the first week in January, the last week in December, sometime around then I was actually contacted by the transition team, and I have it in my notes because that was one of the dates I kept. And it was told that my name had been suggested to them, and would I be interested? And I said, well, I really didn't think I had an interest because I wasn't political. And they said, well, why don't you come in and talk about it? And we talked over the phone about some of the issues and how I felt. And they asked me to come in and sit and talk with Secretary-designate Marshall. And I just couldn't refuse coming in and talking with what was to be the new Secretary of Labor. And coming in with the thought that I really wouldn't take the job. And as I told Secretary Marshall, would not take the job. I had things pretty much as I wanted them. I had been divorced in 1975. I had been put in for a promotion to a full professor and was going to receive that. I had lots of contracts and grants. Could do just about anything I wanted to do academically. Had many graduate students, very fine ones. And I just
had a lot to lose.
I had a lot to lose. I had good consulting arrangements, and I just didn't think I wanted to uproot my life at that point in time. I felt like I had little to gain by disrupting my life, I'd finally gotten it to where I wanted it. After a
later,
long struggle.
later we'll get to whether you feel it was finally worth it or not. But to continue with this early startup phase, I've read that you were one of the very few people, sub-cabinet people, who were personally interviewed by the president.
Well, I've been
true?
told that I was one of 2 assistant secretaries interviewed, and
Right.
I was interviewed by Secretary Marshall. He and I, it was interesting. I voiced my reservations to him, told him what I thought the agency needed, and he said, "Well, you sound just like me," because I was a professor too, and I had everything just the way I wanted it. And I said I didn't want to uproot my life, so he said it's very familiar. And I knew that we had a personal chemistry and a meeting of the minds and of the hearts in terms of working men and women. And I felt that he would offer me the job, and I was going to probably have to come to grips with the reality that I might actually have the opportunity to come, and what would I do if that were to happen. Oh, I don't know, a few days later I was in Washington actually doing some consulting for NIOSH, and I got a call from the transition team asking me the next day to come out from Rockville, which is of course their office here in Washington, and to come over and meet with the president because the president wanted to interview me. And I came and met.
How did you feel about that?
Oh, I just thought, well, you know, he's just another person. And I thought he was very informal and relaxed, and
Was it just you alone with the president?
no, it was
or
the
group,
secretary
or
and I were with the
secretary?
president. We met in the outer, I don't know the room, it's that room where most people go in before they go into the Oval Office. Oval Office is where we met, and I have that picture on my wall. It was taken that day. And I just thought, well, I would be very straightforward with the president how I felt, because I didn't want to come in and compromise anything that I stood for. And not that I thought I would have to, but I felt like I didn't need the job. And if they wanted me, why, they, you know, had to accept me the way I came without any compromise. So I met with him. It was a very delightful meeting, and the president said to me, "I know you'll do a good job." And I realized that he thought that
you had a job.
I
at that
had a
point.
job, and I hadn't really decided what I was going to do, and then I had to go home and talk with my children and my family and my graduate students to decide what I was going to do.
Well, the interview with the president, was it basically what you call a formality, or was there some substantive discussion?
He asked me, he said that he felt that this is a very important job. He had talked about occupational safety and health when he had gone throughout the United States, and he wanted to personally interview the individual that was selected for that job. I don't know whether he had any feedback from anybody that I would take a very hard line on certain issues, or what the motivation was. He said the motivation was that he had heard this issue raised time and time again when he'd gone out campaigning. And he gave me an example of what he thought was inappropriate behavior for the agency.
The issue of OSHA itself.
Yes, and inappropriate behavior, and then he gave me an example of what he thought was appropriate behavior, and I agree with him 100%.
Well, do you remember the two examples?
Oh, I'll never forget them. The one example was a small factory in a town in the Midwest, and there was the company had built a little garden and had put up a little stone enclosure, a place for people to go out and eat their lunch. And as the story goes, and it may be that somebody told him a story when they relayed this to him, but the story goes that an OSHA inspector came and cited the company for having a railing that was not the appropriate height. Of course, this was not truly a railing to keep somebody from falling with, but was really an enclosure in a garden. And
another horror story.
it was a totally inappropriate action. The other story he told me was about an asbestos plant that he visited while he was campaigning, and he said, you know, I walked in and started coughing, and I felt very uncomfortable, and I talked with the workers about OSHA and what they thought about it, and they said they thought it was very important and a wonderful thing, and I said, he said he talked to them about the dust in the facility, and they said, oh, this facility is so clean now, you should have seen it before. And he indicated to me, you know, that even as it wasn't too good. So I think that he and I agreed that the substantive issues were what we should deal with. And I have felt his backing all along. I think it was very good for me in this job to have had that communication with him early on.
So you felt he has strong White House backing
Right.
right off the bat.
Right.
We'll get into this a little more later too. Well, when you came into office, OSHA was in, all sides saw OSHA as being in an ocean of trouble. What do you see? What did you see then as the main problems, and what was your main strategy?
Well,
off the bat.
I think there was this one of the main problems is the perception of many people that OSHA was about some silly things. The president and I discussed one of them. There were other examples, and I'm sure that today there are still some people who make mistakes out there. But the perception, I felt, had to be eliminated that we were about frivolous, irrelevant rules and regulations. And early on, the secretary and I talked about the fact that this agency should be about the whales, not the minnows. And maybe I should say the sharks, not the minnows, but people who like to preserve whales. But, and Secretary Marshall and I discussed that Senator Yarborough had said one time that that was one of the things that was wrong with OSHA, that they should be about the whales instead of the minnows. And the whales are those severe health problems that are out there. So we had a many-pronged attack.
Somebody asked, was this, you mentioned Senator Yarborough, was this at your confirmation hearing?
No, it was not. Senator Yarborough is, I don't know, I guess I'm not sure whether he's dead now or not. I guess he is, but he would be very, very old now. He was from Texas.
Yeah.
He was instrumental in the passage of the Occupational Safety and Health Act, and some of the most important language in the legislative history is that senator's. And Secretary Marshall, I guess, knew him, and he and I discussed that. And now people have sent me, some of the people who were here with me at the very beginning have sent me little whales, little ceramic whales and everything is the symbol that we were after the whales, not the minnows. One of the things we did was the standards deletion project. And no matter what you say about it, we eliminated 928 regulations that made us look silly. And it's interesting that some of the people in the new administration, I've forgotten who it was, actually talked about how terrible OSHA was and cited some of the regulations that were on the books that we actually eliminated them. They haven't kept up with what we've done. But we started then pushing for new health regulations in targeting inspections to the areas where there were real poisonings occurring, to where the fatalities were occurring. The targeting system certainly we have improved. It's still primitive. It will remain primitive until we have a better system of collecting data in this country. And but those were some of the things that we said about targeting our inspections, putting out health standards, eliminating some of the safety standards, taking some of the safety standards and making them more performance-oriented, the fire protection code, the electrical standard, and actually then beginning to look at the development of standards in the safety area that had never been developed before. There certainly needs to be standards in some of the ergonomic areas that have never been addressed.
If I can kind of jump back a little bit, when you came into office, there seems to have been a very wide, I should say, a deep reservoir of goodwill and hopefulness on all sides that finally OSHA would function well and would satisfy everybody. But when the common sense priorities policy, shortly after it went into effect, it seems as though OSHA took a number of actions that immediately caused great consternation in the business community. You had a lead standard, benzene, the emergency benzene standard was the first thing, which came in even before that. I realize that, of course, was in the works from the previous administration. Sure. The generic cancer standard came out later, and that was in the works from the previous administration too. And there were a number of things that immediately caused problems.
But that's the nature of occupational.
Did you expect that? Let me ask you this.
Of course I expected it, because what I wanted to do was say, now look, we're not going to play around with the silly rules and regulations. We're going after the serious hazards. And we went after the inspection of coke ovens, after the places where there are poisonings occurring, lead or what have you. I never expected to run a popularity contest at OSHA. It's lead poisoning, carcinogens in the workplace. Those are cause serious health hazards, are serious health hazards. It costs money to clean up those workplaces, and it was not ever a notion that I had that we would be popular in all segments of the community when we began to issue those standards. However, we would be doing what the law, I believe, tells us to do. Determine that there are significant risks out there and begin to issue the standards, enforce those standards. And it never occurred to me that it would be otherwise, that we would not have resistance. But the resistance comes from people who don't want to have to spend the money.
Were you surprised at the depth of the resistance?
No, I think the resistance was not very deep-seated. I think that the support is what I found to be so overwhelming. The support and the reinforcement and the calls I would get was the most important thing. People in the academic community, people in the many people in the business community, not the lobbyists, not the people here in Washington who talk a lot, but the people who are industrial hygienists, occupational physicians, who are out in the factories, in the plants throughout the United States. I would see them in a scientific meeting, or they would drop in to see my office here and shake my hand and say, stick to your guns. Now, those aren't the people who make the headlines, but that's the kind of support that you need.
Professionals
The
working in the field.
professionals who say, look, if you don't do this, my company will not put out the money for this new ventilating system. And since we have, since they know that you are working on this standard, you'd be surprised at what's happening in my company. And you know, most of my graduate students have gone to work for industry. And there are a few that have gone to work for government, and now there are a few more in more recent years who've gone to labor unions, but the bulk of them have gone to industry. And they'd say, stick to your guns. And that support was very important, because what it was said, well, you know, our attorneys may fight you, but if you don't do it, why, this company will not clean up. Also,
Was there other business support? Were there any corporate officers that came forward?
I had some encouraging words. I can remember one day we had a cost-benefit meeting over in the Commerce Department. There were a lot of corporation people there, and they were very friendly. I can remember Carrie, who's president of IBM, saying, we're going to put a report out, and I think you're going to be pleased with reading it. You know, there have been some encouraging statements from some corporations. I think the encouragement, I tell you, there's no encouragement though like a worker coming up to you and personally thanking you for a standard, and that they're putting in new ventilation in his or her factory. That is a tremendous personal reward. But aside from that, it wouldn't have mattered whether everything I had to do was unpopular with everybody. That's the law. And the law says you're supposed to do this, 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 and this. And you take an oath of office to carry out and to implement that law. It's a job, it's not a popularity contest.
Well, you certainly well, I want to pursue this on the business relations because it is an important thing. Did you have very extensive contacts with business while you're making policy for OSHA?
Oh yeah, I spent a fair amount of time with the National Federation of Independent Businesses. I visited them in California, told them about our consultation program. We doubled the amount of money that's available in consultation. And we have consultation available now in every state and territory. And this is all more than a doubling in terms of the number since I came to OSHA, which I think is very interesting, that consultation and promotion of consultation, so-called voluntary compliance, has been a something that one usually attributes to Republicans. However, I think that's incorrect. It makes sense to provide consultation. Technical support is important. It's particularly important for small businessmen and women. And I think that the relationship with the NFIB hasn't always been the best, simply because I felt they have lobbied the Congress for things that flew in the face of their dealings with me. But nevertheless, I have been willing to go to their meetings. I have a little paperweight that I will carry away with me that they gave me at a meeting here in Washington last year where I spoke. And I have tried to keep dialogue with them. Particularly important was, I thought, I had a labor liaison, but that there be a business liaison. I think Mort had one.
Yes.
But what I did was,
Morton Corn.
yes, the former assistant secretary, have one for small business. Kay Clapp comes from the Small Business Committee on the Hill. and she from the Senate side, and I thought it was important for her to have dialogue, more intensive dialogue with particularly the small business community, because you know the attorneys and the lobbyists all represent the large corporations, and they have professionals on their staff who come in and sit down with our people who write standards. But the small business community is somewhat isolated, and sometimes they never know we're even working on a standard. And Kay has built up good lines of communication that I hope will continue along after me, so that they can come in and participate early. And it may be that we will want to be doing, having a requirement that's a little bit different because of our attention to the small business community. For example, in a performance standard, where you let a corporation solve the problem as long as they come to a certain level of a proficiency.
Right.
Is
Rather
a
than
good,
telling them exactly what
Yeah.
they have to do to.
That's an interesting concept and very
Okay.
important, one that I'm in favor of, and it, you know, promotes innovation. However, a small business man or woman would like to have a how-to, so they don't have to go out and figure out their, or hire somebody to do it for them and all that. So the needs are quite different. And this was expressed to me early on with a small business conference that was held at the White House, and it was the first 2 weeks I was here. And I went over to that, and the small businessmen and women were very different than corporations. I'd always been around large corporations and had known the physicians and the industrial hygienists and the personnel people, but it's a different kind of a organization, and their problems and needs are different. And I think this has been important for us, and I hope this would continue, that we wouldn't, in this agency, and the next assistant secretary, fall back to just dealing with the large corporations. We now have a grant to one of the small business associations because we want them to be able to provide, in their peer groups, have the proficiency and provide occupational safety and health. Sometime.
Oh, we'll get to them.
Okay.
Okay. Well, there were so many controversial things that went on. The standards and let's start at with I guess one of the most famous ones, the cotton dust standard. This involved a what some would call a battle between the Labor Department and the White House on the level of the cotton dust. What were you satisfied? You were very concerned with this standard, and reportedly you threatened to resign if it did not meet your what you felt was necessary.
Yeah.
Were you satisfied with the final stand? You did not resign, so you must.
Well, if I had
have
been
been
satisfied,
satisfied.
I would have resigned because, as I told you earlier, well, I came here on a leave of absence from the College of Medicine, so I had some measure of security that I suppose some people don't have. But, you know, the cotton dust battle started long before I came. Certainly it was one of the standards that was around when the first assistant secretary was at OSHA. And
right.
it will last longer than I, because it certainly it will be argued before the Supreme Court the day after I leave, the 21st of January. It began, and we were under literally a court order to come out with it. There was a difference of opinion as to what the level should be, what the times should be, and this difference of opinion and the cost, and whether or not we were cost effective, I think are the words. There was a a discussion with the CALPS,
It's the Council on Wage and Price Stability.
and then I believe the CEA became involved, the Council of Economic Advisors, Charlie Schultz, and some of the people who worked with him.
Were you involved in any of these discussions with the
Some of them,
CEA,
yes,
or-
some of them, but I kept myself pretty much aloof from it. And mostly other people in the agency were involved, although certainly.
Was Basil Whiting? the
No, Basil
principal
wasn't
person?
really not involved. Was pretty much Grover Wren and Roland Droich and some of the other people around the department who were involved. And Grover, of course, was head of standards then. And there was a need to get the standard out and a decision. And apparently, we got word that a decision memo had been prepared for the president on this issue of the cotton dust standard and what kind of levels and requirements were to be in it, and that he had come down, not on our side, not on Secretary Marshall's and my side in terms of what the level should be, and that Charlie Schultz would make an announcement about it. So this was sort of you might say, a family fight, a feud within the administration. Secretary Marshall asked Mr. Schultz not to go forward with the press release because it had become very, there were a lot of leaks on both sides as to what was actually happening behind the scenes. Much of it got in the newspaper. Secretary Marshall called the president, spoke to the president personally for 10 or 15 minutes, indicated what he thought the issues were, and the president said, well, I don't think, if that's the case, I don't really think I have been presented with all the facts. We better have a meeting about this.
This is a highly unusual action for a president to become involved in a regulatory
So, well,
decision.
he really did not want to become involved in it. He had just said, okay, these are the alternatives, and you're recommending this one to me. Okay. So he called us all over. Secretary Marshall, I went over. The vice president was there. Charlie Schultz was there. And we sat around the table, and I took my books about the problems with the long-term use of personal protective equipment instead of engineering controls, and how it doesn't really work over the long haul. It's a short-term solution.
The council, the CEA, was advocating the personal protection.
Just using respirators as the alternative. And so we went over there armed with all our packages, sat with the president, and explained to him our position, and we came out feeling that we couldn't believe it, because when I left the building and went over there, I talked to some of my staff about the fact that if I had to give in on that and we could not have engineering controls, then I really couldn't stay and run the agency under those circumstances. They understood.
You told
My
people,
staff
your own staff.
My own staff, the Schedule Cs, my people who had come with me, and they understood how I felt about it. And I came back from the White House literally beaming, and they just couldn't believe what had happened. And I felt
it was decided on the spot in this meeting,
in
and
the
it was
meeting
decided
how it was to be, that we would go forward with the engineering controls. It would be a 4-year period, a 1.5-year preparation period for monitoring, and then 4 years after that So it was a very good and solution to the problem. The president understood it, and actually there was no problem selling him on it. I'm amazed at how it could have gone the other way. It was an interesting experience that, I mean, I never felt that he faltered a minute while we were in the room with him.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a good thing. The rest of the people left the room. Secretary Marshall and I stayed on and discussed with him the Willow Island disaster,
Mm-hmm.
the tower collapse, and he asked me what I thought had been the problem, and we talked about the fact that there had been there were problems with the concrete and some of the testing,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a good conversation.
So this cotton dust meeting has reaffirmed apparently seems to have reaffirmed the commitment that you felt right from the start from the White House to
That's
support
right.
your approach.
Certainly, you know, many people, and I guess that's not unusual, say the White House wants this or the White House wants that. And they invoke the name the White House.
Mm-hmm.
And they are alluding to the fact that the president wants this or that. Well, sometimes when you find out what the president really wants, it's not quite the same.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very important that we had that meeting. And
very historic
very,
event.
as far as I was concerned, it was a very historic. It really renewed my faith, and I tell you, it made me a very strong supporter of the president, because I felt that he had come down on the side of what was the right thing to do in a certainly we must be candid about, and what must be a very difficult situation for him, because he comes from a state. A great deal of his support had to have come from textile owners, and this was a big burden for them financially.
Mm-hmm.
And he did the right thing. And to tell you, my opinion of him was high, but it rose 1,000% after that meeting.
Other standards, well, the benzene standard is one of the biggest items, I guess. The issue there, as with so many standards, was feasibility, economic feasibility.
Which the court never did address.
No.
And will be addressing it with cotton dust, you see. But what the court did address had really little to do with benzene as a contaminant. Had to do with what the Occupational Safety and Health Act really requires in terms of demonstration of the need for a standard. And they said,
Yes.
and I think the plurality decision, certainly not a majority, but the way the votes came out, the standard was remanded. So theoretically, to get a standard through that court anyway, you would have to provide the evidence that there is a significant risk at the level of the contaminant.
But the controversy involved feasibility, though, the criticism to a large extent, did it not?
Well, economic feasibility.
Yes.
Yes. Not even feasibility. They said it was possible for them to do it. It wasn't even that. It was that they said there was too much money to be spent to save a life. So it wasn't really feasibility. It was really the issue that was brought up the most was that it cost too much to save one life. So it was a cost-benefit analysis. Were the benefits commensurate with the costs? And that issue was not addressed. The court addressed another issue, really.
Yes.
So but I guess that's how laws are changed over time with the courts' participation. Certainly, the Occupational Safety and Health Act is a broadly written statute, and it has been necessary to look to the Congress, to look to the medical community, to look at the courts for guidance in how you proceed.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't tie your hands, and that's perhaps useful on the one hand, but then on the other hand, it's also possible to, it's necessary to need some guidance sometimes as to what you can or cannot do legally. So.
Well, that's enough for now, I think, on controversies. There are no end of items that became controversial. I'd like to go back a bit to the origin of this common sense priority, the policy of using common sense. When did that begin? I know that the president first came to the Labor Department, visited in I think January or February of 1977, and he was quoted there as saying he would expect common sense to be used in OSHA. So that phrase was in the air, but I'd just like to get into the origin of that.
Well, I think when the president came to the department, he knew that I was to be the assistant secretary, and he and Secretary, I think it probably first came into the air when Secretary Marshall and I talked the first time. We talked about whales and minnows and what was common sense to do and wasn't, and I suspect it just developed as a result of those early conversations that we had together and that we had with the president. And you know, you will come then to let's say the department, and then your thought processes will pull out a few words, and that word I think got pulled out and stuck.
But it was announced with what you call a pretty great fanfare, and how did it develop that it became a kind of a major announcement? We decided that we ought to do a number of things in the department. We wanted our compliance officers, for example, to understand that we weren't interested in a small infraction of a rule that was not meaningful. We set about the process of eliminating standards, and we did the 928 and all these things, and we decided that the way to do that was to to begin the targeting on the high hazard industries, and that we should not just do these things one at a time, that we should pull them together. And Frank Greer certainly was responsible for, you might say, packaging it in that way and pulling it all together and doing it all at one time. At that time, Frank Greer was your special assistant
for public information. And that's how we decided to do that. And that set the stage for the targeting, for the development of controversial standards, and for the elimination and the move toward performance standards. Not included in that package, but interestingly enough, the very first session, and I looked at my some handwritten notes the other day, for a session that I had with the secretary and the undersecretary back in February of 1977, before I was confirmed and everything, at my goals and everything. And the educational program was one of those goals, and it was one of those items that the secretary was enthusiastic about, and that we pushed forward with. The labor unions were not very interested in that. And I think they probably now, at this point in time, would say that that probably is one of the most important contributions that this administration has made, the New Directions Grant Program, and the attempts to see that workers and small business men and women are educated.
Could you explain a little bit about New Directions?
Well, the New when I came here, the education was not a line item in the budget. It's hard to believe, but it was not.
That is surprising.
What happened was...
there was an office. There was previously an office.
That's right, but it was education for people in OSHA, training films, but there was not a line item. I mean, it was the Office of Federal Agency Programs, Education and Training, but it was mostly training for our own people, our institute, and there were films made and courses prepared for people on the outside. But there was not a line item for, you might say, extramural training. And what would happen, I think, is as the end of the fiscal year would come around, they would sometimes give some contracts, and they gave it to a few universities. Actually, they gave it through the AIHA, the American Industrial Health Association, who parceled it out, subcontracted it to universities. But it was always an afterthought, so to speak. And what we did was make it a line item in the budget the first year. We got $2 million added onto the budget by the Congress. So happened that there were some people in the Congress who were interested in what I thought should happen and have to say, and after some courtesy calls, they decided that was a pretty good idea and gave us an extra $2 million in the budget. Now, of course, you're never supposed to do that. Everything's supposed to go through channels, but that's what happened.
Which congressmen were particularly sympathetic on this item?
Well, I think the Appropriations Committee in general, Congressman Obie.
Of Wisconsin?
Yes. Chairman Flood was very encouraging. The Senate side, I made courtesy visits, and our Appropriation Committee was very interested in that because they were interested in seeing OSHA succeed and not fail. And I think it was a very important thing. It was not enthusiastic supported by labor unions. They were more interested in inspectors, but now they certainly are sold on the program. And I think it's the most important thing that I've done. And it will, I think, continue some way or another in some version after I leave.
Speaking
it's been
of the future,
institutionalized.
in our last minute or two, looking at the future, what recommendation, what advice would you give to an incoming head of OSHA?
Well, first of all, the incoming head of OSHA now has many people on staff who are professionally trained, which is something that has happened in the last 4 years. We've been able to attract physicians and chemists and industrial hygienists and safety specialists, and they shouldn't sell short the professionals on this staff because they're well trained, highly technical, highly motivated, and they believe in the program, and they will work very hard for you.
So you would depart with kind words for
yes.
the OSHA staff.
Oh yes, they're very dedicated. You know, you're always going to have a compliance officer, a person who doesn't do the right thing, and you come down hard on those people. You must not allow for any infraction of rules about, ethical behavior. You have to, but you must provide, I think, encouragement for those people. They work very hard for you. They believe in the program. I think it's important that the director of OSHA be professionally secure. It helps, I'm sure, in this job to be one who is professionally secure in occupational safety and health. I hope that's the way it would be for the next assistant secretary, because you continually must defend your reason for being, what changes can be expected to occur as a result of such a law. You have to be prepared to defend the fact that all the benefits that accrue as a result for a law such as this cannot be put into dollars and cents. Many of these benefits are the benefits that you might say are in the Constitution, the justice, the public welfare. You have to be prepared to, and I think that's to take criticism, justified and unjustified, because this is a remedial law. It costs money. You might say it is always in attention with that bottom line that our corporations have to show to their stockholders. Fortunately, I think for the next assistant secretary, more and more people who are stockholders in companies want to have a company that is socially responsible, that are not killing people, that are not poisoning workers. And as we go into the next decade with the Occupational Safety and Health Act, it will become easier, because people now, I think one of the things that we've done is raise the expectations of workers in this country about safety and health. And that makes it easier for you, because they tell their bosses, and so gradually it will become part of our life.
You have 60 million inspectors out there working for you for free.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.